How do we see telco operators potentially becoming businesses that are able to reinvent themselves on new platforms for future growth?
Well, I guess, Pramesh, this is an interesting question, but not limited to telco industry, because digitization in general is impacting any business today, right? In finance, we have seen digital banks with no physical infrastructure coming on. On transport, well-known and kind of cliche example now of Ubers and, Airbnbs and all sharing. And there are industries like media, it has been already disrupted forever. It will never go back to what media is. Media consumption and how we consume media completely changed. Now this is moving into real big disruptions in terms of banking, insurance, and telco, and probably in the future, healthcare and transportation as well. So this digitalization really impacts cross-industry, in a very big manner. So I think for communication service providers, it is an opportunity, because now they are coming from an enabling environment of all this communication to all these industries and users. So they understand what it takes to leverage that knowledge and turn it into new revenue streams. That's exactly what they are trying to do with these new digital services. So probably we will see telcos are playing really key and critical role in the evolution of other industries, all the way from healthcare, transport to probably financial services and media as well. So I think the industry has been changing quite drastically since its inception, indeed. A century ago, from the early stage communication networks to date, and it will continue evolving. And I think it's really an exciting industry to be in.
So I just want to go back to the issue of networks and in particular around spectrum. I guess we've already seen some 5G auctions take place in Europe and in the Americas. Whereas in South Africa, we still need to set out the framework for the deployment of or additional 4G spectrum. Yunita, you've spent a lot of time, I guess, with the regulator and the people who are designing the policy around this. Do you think we will get 4G in 2019?
Well, we've already got LTEs. What's interesting for me is I think that, lack of spectrum has been a critical enabler of the fibre industry, because, the amount of fibre backhaul has been put into place. But yeah, I'm very positive. I think we're on the right track. I really, really believe that the Minister, Ndabeni Abrahams, is the right person for the job. And she understands the market, she knows the market, she's an incredibly hard worker, she's been with us for a really, really long time in her role as Deputy Minister, and I think we're in for a good time. I would put my money in it.
I think you're quite right. We already do have 4G, but it's probably not the most efficient given the lack of spectrum. I think, no telco discussion in 2019 is complete without a discussion around 5G. And it's quite interesting. There's a huge amount of literature on the implications of 5G, but there's not much literature that explains quite simply what 5G is. Bora, if I can give you that challenge, can you quite succinctly describe what 5G is?
In 5G, we need to go back to the roots of 5G and how ITU defines 5G from an IMT 2020 vision point of view. I think that really gives the context of what 5G is, and which is really enabling mobile connectivity to everyone and everything. And it is also enabling a socioeconomic development in many ways. This is what the original strategy of 5G underlined by. So there are three probably key pillars to 5G. One of them is enhanced mobile broadband, which is really enabling mobility connectivity to anything and everything, from your cell phones to sensors, for different speeds, for different reliability purposes. The second pillar is really massive machine type communication, which is your IoT type of communication, enabling all the sensor type or machine to machine connectivity. And the last aspect is ultra reliable low latency communication, which is really taking this technology to put it in use in critical applications, all the way from your self-driving cars to remote surgeries to operating your rail operations from a line switching point of view and all, which are really dependent on the latency and reliability issues. So these are the three underlying pillars. So in terms of technology though, there are so many techniques that goes into 5G, and some of these techniques are already being used on current 4G networks. It goes all the way from using multiple frequencies together in providing, transmitting the data. It goes into using multiple input antennas, basically main antennas talking to each other, and densification through small cells, because 5G, I mean, probably the most highlighted aspect of 5G is use of millimeter waves, because at the end of the day, spectrum is limited today. We are using all the way to the 6 gigahertz. And the nature of radio frequency is you can only transmit limited amount of data. So what we do is, okay, if it is the case, why don't we use more spectrum? And we have plenty available on the north of 24 gigahertz. So that is what we are bringing in with 5G. But the challenge is, I mean, if you are going higher in the spectrum frequency, your coverage becomes, much denser. So you need many more sites. So that's the, small cell and densification aspect. And most of these things are happening on the radio level on 4G networks today. So 5G sometimes is really, overstated in my opinion. It's really a good marketing for most of the communication service providers, or even for countries for that purpose. But reality is, I mean, it is really a combination of different techniques. But I think we shouldn't forget what 5G is trying to achieve. Really, that goes back to the underlying principles of 5G, regardless of what are the techniques that we are using to achieve it.
So without, I guess, going into the technical detail of 5G, for me, I like to summarize it into three areas which you've touched on. The first is taking us into a realm of gigabit per second speeds. Secondly, greater efficiency in terms of bandwidth and therefore capacity. And the third then is it enables far lower latencies than what we are currently seeing under 4G or even 3G technology. So if you cover those three areas, I guess the next element is what are the use cases that lends itself to the deployment of 5G technology? I think, where people have the view that it allows you to, stream 4K type movies over broadband, that's a very limited perception of 5G and the potential of 5G. I think it takes it into a completely different realm, because 4G can currently solve the requirement for high definition streaming. So what are some of the use cases that you've been talking to your industry members around, Juanita? I
think the single biggest one that we are considering are self-driving cars, autonomous driving, as we call it. I think, if you look at the reliability that 5G promises, I think that's critical, because nobody wants to be in a vehicle that is driving itself on a network that is not reliable. And I think that 5G promises, and we have to talk about it as in the future, because we don't really know, that we'll have these ultra reliable networks. But when we talk about these things, people think that a lot of this autonomous driving and things are very futuristic and, a bit like the Jetsons. But it's because we are slowly exposed to technologies that we become accustomed to. So, when I speak to people about autonomous driving, I always ask them, I said, do you have a speedo cruise on your car? So when you drive long distance route, do you use your speedo cruise? Because that's a form of autonomous driving, a smaller form of it. So this is just the next step. And we're not going to obviously see autonomous driving in every suburb and in every road. But, and I think this is the interesting part where the conversation is taking place right now about 5G and the architecture of 5Gs. Where will we require 5G? So I think that, we'll see, in my opinion certainly, is that 5G is a technology on national long distance routes for autonomous trucks, autonomous drive vehicles, autonomous taxis, transport modes. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on people and on MNOs to deploy and get the architecture right and understanding where they are deploying.
So I think to round up the conversation that we've had thus far, let's just talk about the implications of a digital economy in the South African context. Are we ready for a digital economy? What are the threats that a digital economy potentially brings in an environment where we have very high unemployment and a very low skills base? Just to get your thoughts around that.
Well, I think, it's not a question of if we are ready or not, because digital economy is there already, regardless. So we are already part of a digital economy. Today we are using Uber, we are using Netflix, we are using cloud services. Most of the enterprises have already moved into cloud. We passed the tipping point on most of the digitization, and it's just the evolution of it and further adoption of it. The question, the implications in terms of jobs, in implications in terms of skills, is massive, because obviously, as I mentioned before, this global digitization, every industry do require doing things quite differently because businesses are evolving, including telcos themselves as well. In the past, they had to have massive engineering teams to design and operate this network. So the machines are operating itself, the network is operating itself. You don't need that massive capability. Then what do you do with this skill set and a team of people who are specializing on a topic? But on the other hand, we have a massive gap in terms of new digital skills in every industry. And enterprise space, again, cloud is easy to say, but difficult to properly structure and deploy. So obviously, reskilling of the people will be required. I don't think in net effect we will end up with job losses. It is more really reskilling the people and planning for it and really getting it in a timely manner. So I don't think there is enough focus in this, and I see there's a really big requirement for us, both private sector point of view, legislation point of view, to focus on how do we reskill people, how do we redeploy these new skills in the areas that are needed, because there will definitely be an impact on in every business, including telcos. It's just a question of then how do we really bridge the gap by using existing skills.
I'd like to add to that, but I think we need to take a step back. I think it needs to start with our basic education system. We need to empower our children, and as soon as they go to school, our children we need to introduce another language, which is code. Our children have to, from a very young age, learn to code, and the basic education system, our curriculums need to change to, at that age, already start an enabling environment where we are raising up digitally mature children that come through the ranks, so that when they finish with school, they already have a platform that can be utilized. But yeah, digital maturity is a concern. I'm especially concerned about the SMME market and whether they are really evaluating themselves and looking at what is available out there, and the efficiencies that they can achieve and the cost savings that they can achieve by applying technology to their businesses. But lots of work that needs to be done.
I personally see the digitalization of the South African economy as a massive positive in terms of addressing a number of the social challenges that we have. So the digital or digitalization probably makes it that much easier for a standardized level of education across the youth of South Africa. Secondly, it then also allows for further training and development of young people. So effectively reducing the cost of delivering training and development material to individuals, and running that off the back of a high-speed data network then allows greater access to the material that's available.
Exactly, we talk about use cases, and we also, a couple of years ago, we had the fees must fall movement, and one of the questions that we brought up as an industry association is that we said, so let's go by the assumptions that fees do fall. Where are we physically going to put the students? Physically, the universities cannot accommodate them. So we have to find alternative methods of educating people. And of course, e-education is that method. But in order to achieve that, we have to ensure that people have access to reliable and affordable internet.
Absolutely. The second use case I would think is certainly in terms of healthcare and access to healthcare, particularly for people who don't have easy access to transport modalities to the nearest hospital or the clinic. And then the third is then in terms of financial inclusion. I think what we're seeing in terms of the development of digital banks, mobile money type services, is that more individuals can become active participants in the formalized economy. So I don't think physical cash is anywhere near dead for now, but I think certainly, as we've seen in some of the other markets, particularly in Kenya, where mobile money and financial services actually acts as an enabler towards economic growth.
Exactly.
Bora, Yonita, thank you very much. I think this has been a most enlightening conversation for me. I do appreciate the time that you've taken. Any final and closing comments from your side?
I think, probably just to wrap up of what we have discussed, we are living in an era that is changing, and within the industry that we are in, from a TMT point of view, it is really dynamically and very fast changing as well. I encourage all my colleagues and all stakeholders in the industry to really be more future looking and try to deal with the problems of the future rather than the problems of the yesterday. And today, in my opinion, there is a bit of focus shift that needs to happen in the industry, and I think these kind of conversations are really helpful to drive that change and innovation in the industry. And thanks for having me, for being part of this discussion, Permission.
Personally, I just think that we are in incredibly exciting times. I think that there's a fantastic future that lies ahead. I think the opportunities that the digital world will bring us is endless. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we educate people in terms of how to capitalize on those opportunities and how to get individuals out there ready to use this as a springboard for their own futures. Thank you for having me.